Today we're going to talk about the most bizarre game in baseball history, and yeah, it's a game you already know at least something about. On July 4th, 1985, the front page of the combined Atlanta Constitution and Atlanta Journal promised fireworks in numerous parts of the city. Most prominently were the ones at Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. Tickets were still available at the 52,000 capacity seat stadium. Interestingly enough, the game did not sell out. The threat of rainstorms in the southeast didn't deter any of the 45,000 people who bought tickets from showing up that evening. Of course, this weather forecast was also pretty vague. I'm guessing most of those fans didn't know what they were in store for. Alright, I've got to conclude that the fans that went to the ballpark that evening went more for the fireworks than for the baseball. I mean, neither one of these teams was exactly competitive. The Braves came into this game with a .453 winning percentage. They were stuck in 5th place. That magic of 1982 and 1983 had worn off by this point. To this point, the Braves had subpar pitching, not much hitting, and lacked a clear leader at catcher. There was a little bit of hope, though, as the Braves went into the All-Star break. The Mets, for example, looked like they were falling apart. New York was tied with the Cubs for 3rd place, but it played poorly, going 3-7 in its last 10 games. The Mets' pitching was fine, the problem was hitting. The Mets had hit a slump and were having a hard time coming out of it. To make matters worse, center fielder Mookie Wilson had just undergone surgery on his right shoulder. Manager Davey Johnson reluctantly decided to call up Lenny Dykstra for the 3rd time that season, and remember, this was only July. Dykstra was fast, aggressive, and could hit well. His 105 steals in Lynchburg in 1983 were the highlight of his career to that point. Yeah, Lenny Dykstra, he had been up for 4 games back in early May 1985 and had actually done really well. He had most recently been up for a week in late June, and that's when his hitting suffered a little bit, but he didn't start regularly then. But honestly, I really don't understand why Davey Johnson was so reluctant to keep him up. Meanwhile, at third base, Davey decided to bench Howard Johnson, who was having a hard time reaching the Mendoza line. Veteran Ray Knight got the starting job. Now, every single newspaper reported that Rick Aguilera would be the Mets starter. Though the Atlanta papers featured an article about rookie sensation Dwight Gooden, they predicted that he would start the next night with the customary 4 days of rest. But for some strange reason, Davey Johnson decided to have Gooden skip up in the rotation. I really don't understand it. Gooden had most recently started on June 30th against St. Louis. He had pitched well, but Jesse Orosco wound up blowing that game in extra innings. The Mets lost that one 2-1 for their 3rd straight loss to the division-leading Cardinals. The New York Daily News concluded that Davey made the decision to try to get Gooden a 3rd start on this long road trip. Johnson agrees with that in Bats, which is his book about the season. Davey noted in the book that this would deter Dwight from pitching in the All-Star game, which Davey didn't want him to do. Although Gooden was on the National League's All-Star roster, he did not appear in the 1985 All-Star game. Now, before we get into this game, I should note something about the version that we have on video. It's not complete. Time for confession. I'm pretty sure that this digital version originated on the Sports Torrent network a little over a decade ago. This version of the game is actually a combination of 2 different versions of this game. One is from a cassette tape of an old classic Sports Network broadcast, which covers some of the beginning, and then the other part comes from a grainy videotape of the original broadcast, which starts with the top of the 12th inning. People who care a lot about old broadcasts, weird people like me, we get really frustrated with classic sports and ESPN Classic, and this game in particular is a major headache. Classic Sports cut out most pitches from most at-bats and really did a hatchet job with the whole game. Most of the game was not present. They tried to condense it down to 2 hours. Now, I do think that the full original broadcast is probably in an archive somewhere, wherever TBS sends all of their old tapes. Hopefully we'll have access to it one of these days. The game started off with a rain delay of over an hour. Davey Johnson was frustrated by the long delay, especially since the Braves ground crew tried to get Gooden to warm up several times while the tarp was still on the field. Gooden was pitching on short rest for the first time in his career, and his timing was way off. When the game finally started around 9 p.m., Dykstra tried to bunt for a hit to lead it off and almost got on base. Then, after hitting a single, Wally Backman was picked off at first. Now you can clearly see that Backman was safe. It was a bad call, and it set a tone for the rest of the game. The Mets wound up going ahead 1-0 in the first inning after Gary Carter's single splashed into a puddle of water and died. Yeah, at this point, you really have to wonder why in the world they bothered to play this game at all. My bet is that Ted Turner probably didn't want to give out 46,000 rain checks. But seriously, I mean, this is just ridiculous. Braves starter Rich Mahler had severe control problems right from the start. And meanwhile, Gooden had his own woes. Claudell Washington decoyed the Mets defense, turning what could have been just a single into a triple. The Braves tied the game at 1 in the bottom of the first. And Dwight Gooden was clearly not himself. He walked Murphy here on 4 straight. He then did the same thing to Bob Horner. Now, Dwight Gooden, of course, did show that excellent curveball from time to time. However, Dwight continued to labor through the first inning. He wound up giving up 3 walks in all, though he was in the end able to prevent another run from scoring. And then the classic sports broadcast jumps us to the bottom of the third. Davey Johnson's explanation in bats is not quite accurate. Dwight Gooden gave up a single in the bottom of the third before it started raining again. Johnson thought it was the second, and he also forgot which player hit the single. Anyway, Davey Johnson decided to put Roger McDowell in to relieve Gooden, and a bizarre umpiring error caused Johnson to continue the game under protest. It's really strange that Johnson would use McDowell instead of a longer relief man. I mean, Roger already had 4 saves to that point, and he was challenging with Jesse Orosco for the closer role. I'm guessing that Davey Johnson probably thought that this game would be called after 5. This is one of the most famous clips from this game. I used to think that this was the umpire trying to wake up Gary Carter. Actually, he's wiping mud off of his face. This is from the bottom of the third inning. Meanwhile, that puddle of water in center really gave Lenny Dykstra problems. The Braves went up 3-1 on this double by Ken Oberkfell. Then in the top of the fourth, Wally Backman hit yet another ball into that puddle, cutting the lead to 3-2. And then Keith Hernandez followed with a big triple.
And it's at least 3-3, I think. Washington, he slipped it, went right by it. You can't blame him for that. It'll score 2. Hernandez rounds second. He will doubtless reach third. Hubbard doesn't even bother to throw.
This wound up being a huge day for Keith Hernandez, by the way. This home run in the top of the 8th off of Steve Shields put the Mets up 7-4. Hernandez was only a single away from hitting for the cycle. Yeah, and this is where I get really frustrated with classic sports edits. The announcers mentioned a controversial pop-up that Keith hit to center in the top of the third. Dale Murphy trapped it in that puddle, but the umpires ruled it a catch. It should have been a single. That story from this game has gone completely forgotten over all these years. In fact, most contemporary newspaper and magazine accounts of this game don't even mention it. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find a video clip of that play at all. Davey Johnson brought Jesse Orosco in to pitch the bottom of the 8th inning, and Jesse promptly loaded the bases. It's frustrating, but the edited broadcast doesn't show any of the walks Orosco gave up to get to this point. Orosco wound up walking in a run, bringing up Dale Murphy. The Mets were now ahead 7-5. Davey brought in Doug Sisk, who promptly gave up a triple that scored 3. The Braves had come back to take an improbable 8-7 lead. And Atlanta had Bruce Sutter on the mound, who was still one of the premier closers in the game. And now here comes one of the other stories that we've forgotten about. Davey Johnson decided to use Howard Johnson to pinch hit here for the poor hitting shortstop Rafael Santana. Well, Howard broke his slump, getting this base hit to set things up. Danny Heap's single then put runners on first and third with 1 out. And then that rookie that Davey didn't want to bring up, Lenny Dykstra, got an infield single off the first pitch, tying the game at 8. Though he was having a really good game at the bat, the Braves decided to pitch to Keith Hernandez with 2 outs. Hernandez popped up to send this classic to the bottom of the 9th. And yeah, then we have another cut in the action. The classic sports broadcast takes us to the top of the 13th, but fortunately the circulating copy of this game cuts into the top of the 12th from the original broadcast. So if you only watch the Classic Sports edited version, you'll miss this clip of Hernandez getting his single for the cycle. He was only the 4th New York Met to ever hit for the cycle to that point. And then, well, this game just kind of drags on. I need to talk about that. I mean, this was not a swiftly played game, not even in the first inning. This game was very slow, and it dragged on and on and on. With Ray Knight on first, Howard Johnson blasted this home run in the top of the 13th inning to put the Mets up 10-8. The Mets, however, had Tom Gorman on the mound, a middle reliever who was anything but effective. Rafael Ramirez led off the bottom of the 13th with this base hit. That brought up Dale Murphy with a chance to tie it. Gorman's screwball fooled Murphy. And then Gorman got Gerald Perry out on this excellent pitch. With 2 out and an 0-2 count, Terry Harper somehow managed to pull this low outside pitch for a game-tying home run. By this time, it was 2 in the morning. There were about 9,000 people left in the stands. The television broadcast was still going, of course, and the Atlanta Braves announcers kept promising that there would still be fireworks at the end. But was the game ever going to end? When it's 2 in the morning, I guess you do some strange things to stay awake. This bunt by Wally Backman looks fine, right? It turns out that Backman somehow bunted the ball twice. It was rightly called foul. Later on, Gene Garber got Darryl Strawberry to strike out on a pitch they called the thing. And then there was this memorable moment where Keith Hernandez showed off his frisbee skills. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on, and this was just the start of it. At this point, Garber was clearly just going through the motions, scarcely paying attention to what the umpire was saying. And so eventually the Braves pulled him out, and they put in Rick Camp, who was the only player left on the bench or in the bullpen that was not a starting pitcher. Camp is, well, not exactly a household name. While his 9-year career wasn't awful, it also wasn't much to write home about. Camp was 32 by this point and was playing in his final season. He was no longer starting and was now appearing as an emergency mop-up guy in the bullpen. Camp's best-known start to this point was probably Game 3 of the 1982 NLCS against the Cardinals. And that start didn't go so well. Camp left shortly after giving up this triple to Willie McGee in the top of the 2nd inning and wound up the losing pitcher as the Cardinals completed their sweep. That was only 3 years before this crazy July 4th game, and yet Camp looks a lot older. Rick was able to catch Darryl Strawberry looking here, though. Strawberry was thrown out of the game. I mean, you be the judge. I think Darryl and Davey just wanted to go home. Actually, Davey says the umpire called that pitch a strike because it was 3 in the morning. Johnson watched the rest of the game in the clubhouse, watching the exact same TBS broadcast that we're watching. And so we went to the top of the 18th inning, still 10-all. And I think that this sign tells the story. Amidst all the commotion, Howard Johnson got yet another base hit. Howard wound up going 3 for 5, and this hit was the 24th for the Mets, which set a new team record for hits in a single game. And then Rick made one of those 3 in the morning errors, sending Johnson to third. Lenny Dykstra's sacrifice fly put the Mets up 11-10.
And that will score the run. Murph in center field will make the catch.
And it looked like it was lights out for the Braves. Now you have to remember here that Atlanta literally had nobody left on the bench. The only players that hadn't been used yet for either team were starting pitchers. There were 0 pinch hitters left. Tom Gorman, now pitching in his 6th inning, got 2 quick outs. And that brought up Rick Camp. Gary Carter famously decided to wave the outfielders in. I mean, you know what's going to happen here, right? I mean, you can't just like stand up there and wave everybody in like that. You show a guy up like that and he's going to hurt you. Camp fouled 1 pitch off. He then took this strike way off the outside corner. It was 3 a.m. after all. And then he connected. This very well might have been the most improbable home run in the history of regular season baseball. The fans who had stuck this one out went absolutely nuts. Camp had never hit a professional home run in his life and would never hit another one. He retired at the end of this season. I mean, he wasn't going to top that moment, that's for sure. The Mets fielders had thrown their hats on the ground in disgust. Now, this game was not over yet. Bruce Benedict walked on a pitch that was clearly a strike. I mean, everybody was tired. After Gorman finally got the third out, the fans gave Camp a standing ovation as he went back out to pitch yet another inning. Gorman, meanwhile, was really distraught by the whole thing. Well, you kind of want the game to end there, right? I mean, it's a happy story. Howard Johnson got himself back into good graces again. Keith Hernandez had hit for the cycle. Lenny Dykstra had proven himself to his manager. And Rick Camp had one of the craziest home runs of all time. But that's not the way that it is. Gary Carter singled to lead off the top of the 19th. John Christensen then bunted him to second. That's right, he was bunting in the top of the 19th. Now, this is not Davey ball. Remember, Johnson had been thrown out of the game. Still, I think it's an odd decision, but whatever. Up came Rusty Staub. Now, I'll tell you this, you know that you're past your prime when the manager waits until the 19th inning to finally use you, but hey, at least Rusty got a chance. The Braves decided to walk Staub intentionally, which is an absolutely ridiculous decision. It's past 3:30 in the morning, for crying out loud, just play the game. Ray Knight took advantage of poor fielding to hit this double, making it 12-11. Now it was Howard Johnson's turn to draw an intentional walk, another very questionable decision. Danny Heap, a better hitter than Hojo, singled. 3 runs scored after an error by Claudell Washington, whose throw was awful, and now it was 15-11. Wally Backman singled home another run, and it was now 16-11. Well, that's it, right? I mean, this game's out of reach by now. Well, not so fast. Starting pitcher Ron Darling came on to try to get the Braves out. Davey Johnson didn't like the decision, but then again, he was in the clubhouse. According to Davey, Darling had already thrown a simulated game that day and was in no position to pitch again, but here we were. Keith Hernandez made an unusual error on this ground ball with 1 out, putting Claudell Washington on second. Then, with 2 men out, Dale Murphy worked a walk on an excruciatingly long at-bat. This must have been torture for anybody in the stands. I mean, Dale Murphy's at-bat lasted at least 10 pitches, and it was just a real grinder, fouling off pitches left and right. Darling then walked Gerald Perry to load up the bases. Up came Terry Harper, who had already hit a dramatic game-tying home run. Harper singled to right, scoring 2 and making the score 16-13 Mets. And here came Rick Camp with runners on first and third and 2 men out, representing the tying run once again. I mean, this was beyond amazing. This was incredible. This was too crazy for Hollywood. Come on, Rick, you can't take a pitch like that at 4 in the morning. Rick was swinging for the fences this time, strike 2. And then Darling got him to chase a high fastball for strike 3. You should have let that one go by, Rick. And then, as promised, the fireworks show began. This game was more than just a night to remember, it was pure chaos. The box score was almost illegible. The Atlanta Constitution included a summary of only the extra inning scoring, and even then it was quite remarkable. There were 3 blown saves in this game, and the losing pitcher, Rick Camp, wound up being the great hero. It was really a magical moment for a pitcher that otherwise would have been completely forgotten. And as you've probably heard, people in the neighborhood complained to the police when fireworks started going off at 4 a.m. on July 5th. Remember, the 5th was a Friday, and a lot of these people had to go to work. And so, there you have it. Now, keep this game in mind the next time some random guy in one of your replay projects hits a home run despite never hitting one in real life. Not only can it happen, but it absolutely did.